A black family is refused boarding by a flight attendant. The flight then stops after they make one call, calm and respectful. They approached the gate with first-class tickets and a tiny present for their grandmother. However, there was no second glance from the flight attendant. Without examining a single pass, she blocked them, told them to get out of the way, and claimed they had no place up front. The mother said nothing. The children refrained from crying. However, the father only uttered 5 silent words. "I'll give you a call. Just one call. No yelling. No scene." The jet ceased boarding a few minutes later. The woman who believed she was in charge of everything was being led out when the captain emerged. Tell us where in the world you're viewing from today in the comments section below before we begin the tale. Remember to subscribe and enable the bell symbol if you like stories like this, so you don't miss any more. Her posture was even more rigid, and she smiled stiffly as she stood behind the gate counter. Sarah Coleman believed she knew exactly who should be in first class and who shouldn't because she had worked for this airline long enough. She waved the passengers through without looking at them, scanning each ticket as if she were doing them a favor. A family then came forward. 4 well-dressed black passengers who are calm, quiet and respectful. The father, Stephen, had a sleek carry-on and a navy wool coat, Teresa. His wife was wearing a silky cashmere scarf across her shoulders. In hand is a tiny gold gift bag. Their 15-year-old son, Daniel, stood erect and silent, while their younger daughter, Alana, who had her free hand firmly in her mother's, gripped her backpack and peered around with interest. With a courteous nod, Stephen gave the boarding cards to them. Clara's smile tightened as she glanced at them and then at the family. She returned them without scanning a single ticket. She pointed to the far end of the terminal and said, "Gate 6 is where economy is boarding." Teresa scowled softly. "These are tickets for first class." Clara blinked hardly at all. "They must be mistaken, but I'm positive they are." Elite travelers are allowed to travel in first class. Stephen remained unflinching. "Platinum level is what we are." "Kindly scan the passes." After hesitating, Clara picked up and scanned one ticket. It beeped the green light. She looked at another. The same outcome. Her expression remained the same. "Probably a glitch in the system," she said hastily. "It occasionally interprets stuff incorrectly. While we check, you'll have to wait over there." Alana gazed up at her mom, perplexed. "Why are we unable to enter?" Softly, she inquired. Teresa knelt next to her daughter and combed her hair. "It's all right, my love."
"Hold the gift, please." "Okay." Stephen remained still. His speech was calm, but his jaw tightened a little. "Nothing needs to be verified. Our seats are still available. They've been scanned." Clara crossed her arms. "Please move aside, sir, so I can complete boarding." "No," said Stephen firmly. "You have no justification for turning us away." Those waiting in line started to move uneasily. Behind them, a businessman kept his eyes fixed on his phone while feigning to check it.
Looking toward the gate, a woman farther back murmured to her companion. Clara leaned a little closer. "You won't be moving forward at all if you make things more difficult than it has to be." Without saying another word, Stephen took out his phone, stepped aside and punched the dial. Silently he spoke. "Indeed, a situation exists. Gate 4. She has no justification for refusing to board. All 4 tickets did indeed scan." "No justification," Clara sneered loudly enough to be heard. "Always a phone call, of course." She turned her back and rolled her eyes. The gate phone then rang. It was picked up by Ryan Mitchell, the younger agent in the area. His stance changed. "Indeed, sir." "Yes, I do comprehend." After hanging up, he strode toward Clara. "You must stop boarding," he said to himself. Clara blinked. "What are you discussing?" When the supervisor arrived, he instructed that the flight be held. The boarding ceased. The line went cold. They felt as though they were miles away from the low-volume airport talk. The family stayed put. They stood silently together. They all remained silent. They did not quarrel. They did nothing but wait. And it became evident, with each passing second, each observing eye, and each apprehensive murmur, Something more significant had barely begun. With each passing second, the quiet at Gate 4 grew more intense. Confusion made Clara's face flush, but she refused to back down. Her voice was sharp and low as she turned to face Ryan Mitchell. "You don't take orders over the phone from passengers." Ryan Mitchell remained silent. He continued to stare at the distant end of the jet bridge where two individuals had just appeared. One was wearing a dark blue suit while the other was wearing an airport operations jacket with red stripes. Once more, passengers started to move, with some moving sideways for a better view, and others now speaking inaudibly. One woman took out her phone, which was already recording, while she pretended to check her messages. As the two men drew closer, Clara straightened up, and her grin came back like armor. The man in the suit paced his steps calmly and deliberately. David Thompson, Regional Flight Operations Director, was listed on his badge, Carlos Rivera. The airline's ground supervisor was the one wearing the red-striped jacket. They didn't both smile. Clara Henry remarked in a measured tone, "Keep your distance from the counter." Clara paused. "There's a mistake, sir. This family attempted first-class boarding." Henry held up a hand. "Have you looked at their tickets?" She paused when she realized how important her response was. "Two of them indeed," Louise interrupted her. "Though were they legitimate?" Clara gave a grudging nod. "They scanned green, but I believe—" Henry, who was still standing silently a few feet away, glanced past her in the direction of the family. He faced Clara once more. "You were mistaken." He approached the podium, tapped the screen, and brought up the passenger manifest. Ryan Mitchell moved to stand next to him and gestured toward the names. Priority Elite includes Stephen Teresa Daniel and Sophie Harris Rose. 1A through 1D are the 4 confirmed seats. Clara opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Looking at Ryan Mitchell, Louise turned reboard. "Now let them go first, Ryan." Mitchell gave a short nod. "Indeed, sir." Clara stayed motionless behind the counter as the gate doors opened again and the boarding began. Her power had been taken away in public, without protest, without shouting, and without making a fuss. When Ryan Mitchell ushered the family ahead, Stephen nodded slightly. With the youngster still holding the gold present bag, Teresa gently led Alana forward. Daniel trailed behind, instinctively adjusting his blazer with one hand that touched the edge. None of them gave Clara a glance as they passed her, not once. However, their silence weighed more heavily than anything she had heard over the day. Clara felt her heart race. She felt the pit in her gut grow larger. She also experienced a feeling she hadn't had in years as the family vanished down the jet bridge. Uncertainty. There was a problem. The incident had been more than a mistake. The worst thing was that she was unaware of the identity of the person who had called her. However, they had just taken over everything regardless of who it was. The cabin staff had just completed getting first class ready inside the plane. The scent of citrus cleanser and clean linen filled the cabin. Before the other passengers arrived, flight attendants hurriedly tucked in headsets and fixed pillows. Before Ryan Mitchell intervened and ushered the Moore family forward, as the jet bridge door opened, everything appeared to be as usual. Stephen silently escorted his family into the cottage. Daniel strolled steadily, his gaze sweeping over the white leather seats and glossy wood paneling, while Teresa trailed after him, clutching Alana's hand. Without help, they loaded their things into the overhead bins. There was no noise, no inquiries. As was always intended, they just took seats. 1A through 1D, Emily Parker, the lead flight attendant, looked up from her last checks. She started to say hello, but she stopped as she noticed Ryan Mitchell, who appeared anxious. Enter behind them, Rachel approached and spoke softly. "What's happening?" she inquired. Ryan Mitchell leaned closer. They were just escorted through by David Thompson and the ground crew. They were refused boarding by Clara. A call was placed. He sounded even more distant from a very high position. Rachel's gaze expanded. She turned to face the family, who were now settling in, quietly and calmly. They didn't appear upset. They appeared unconcerned. However, there was something about them that still made it seem as though they were awaiting the next phase of an undiscovered plan. Clara was still back at the gate, with her arms folded and her lips squeezed together. She stood close to the counter's corner. Her pride prevented her from expressing how quickly her heart was beating. Luis brought his tablet back to the desk. "Go sit down by the crew area," he urged bluntly. "You'll talk to Mr. Walker following the flight." Clara's eyebrow went up. "This flight is still in progress." "You're not Clara," Luis answered. "Until further notice, you have been pulled from active duty. What for? What purpose? One error." Luis remained silent. He simply gave a nod to the flight attendant on standby, who was already coming over to replace Clara. Clara opened her mouth to object, but she noticed that other passengers were observing. Whispers flowed like wind through the line as phones pointed discreetly. Her face was burning. She remained silent for a moment. Rather, she moved away from the desk and sagged into the crew seat, close to the gate's far side. Rachel went back to the Moore family inside the plane. She lowered her head a little this time. She murmured softly, "If there's anything I can do to make your flight more comfortable." Stephen smiled courteously at her. "You've done more than enough already. Thank you." After giving a single nod, Rachel stepped aside. She felt that something unsaid had changed in the air, but she didn't push or ask questions. The atmosphere was changed, yet the boarding went on, aware that something odd had just occurred. At the gate, passengers streamed in with greater caution. A couple glanced awkwardly at the front row, but as soon as they saw Stephen observing, they swiftly turned their heads away. A silent message from corporate operations emerged on Rachel's tablet screen as the cabin calmed down and the doors started to close. 5 easy words: "The executive office will get in touch." She gave it a quick glance. There was something approaching, and it was a big one. The heavy click of the aircraft door closing was followed by the gentle chime of last-minute cabin inspections. Rachel kept one eye on her tablet while the crew went through safety demonstrations and the engines started to hum. Despite working dozens of flights and witnessing numerous last-minute modifications and mid-air mishaps, she had never seen a message arrive in such a manner. Just those 5 words from the top airline executive, with no background or explanation. She turned to look at the Moores. Stephen watched the flight crew with calm accuracy while sitting peacefully with one leg crossed and his fingers clasped around his knee. Alana rested on Teresa's shoulder, and Teresa ran her fingers over her hair. Daniel had taken out a book, but he hadn't even turned the first page. Like his father, he was observing and listening. It was not tense in the family. They weren't angry. They waited, asking to talk to the captain. Rachel stepped to the front galley and pressed the intercom button. In a matter of seconds, tall and experienced Captain James Carter emerged, the type of man who naturally silenced any space Rachel gave the tablet to him. His eyes narrowed as he read the message. Quietly he said, "Executive Office." She nodded. This went right through. "It has to do with the family in 1A through 1D and what transpired during boarding. They were rejected by the gate agent. There was a call. Everything has changed since then." Captain James Carter looked from the tablet to the family and back again. He remained silent for a long time. He said, "I'll call dispatch," and went back to the cockpit. Clara sat rigidly in the crew jump seat, her arms crossed over her chest. She heard muffled laughs from people who were obviously chatting about her, or saw stares from other passengers every few minutes. She was even passed by a man who mumbled something sufficiently loud. "You still have your badge!" She looked straight ahead, ignoring them, though her mind was racing. Humiliation seared in her chest. For them, why had the airplane been halted? Who was that influential? An entire airplane cannot be stopped by a call unless it originates from her stomach. Yes, she had made assumptions before, but she had done it 100 times. She had never faced such a difficulty. Typically, passengers would become irate and possibly file a complaint, but this wasn't the case. There was more to this. The captain's call was nearly immediately responded up in the cockpit. A cool, collected voice, not dispatch, nor even the typical line supervisor, came through on the other end. This is Airline Strategy Chief Robert Klein. We are aware that there are 4 passengers in seats. 1A through 1D, verify please. The captain answered in a steady, unambiguous voice. Verified. 4 members of the family are seated and comfortable. The boarding reported the issue. Martin didn't raise his voice. It didn't have to continue with the current flight plan. Keep the entire crew on board when you land. Release them just as instructed. The ground response crew will be ready, and the captain, indeed, sir, request that your lead flight attendant stay vigilant. The caller is not a nameless individual. He is one of our largest shareholders. The individual who executed our most recent merger agreement, Michael Harris, is his name. There was silence on the line. With wide eyes, the captain slowly sat back. He glanced at the man sitting in 1A via the window of the cockpit door, composed, calm, and unreadable. Then he realized they hadn't even taken off yet, and this flight had already changed. The aircraft ascended steadily and smoothly into the sky. The passengers took their seats. The soft whir of the motors blended with the quiet hum of discussion. But there was silence in first class. It wasn't awkwardly quiet. It was regulated and measured, with his eyes closed, but not sleeping. Stephen reclined in his chair. Alana was already falling asleep as Teresa softly spread a blanket over her. Daniel's countenance was unreadable as he sat motionless and gazed out the window, offering water. Rachel walked through the cabin. However, her hands lacked their customary steadiness. She continued to peek at the family. She felt weight in her chest every time she passed, as if she were going through something much more significant than she realized. Rather than merely serving beverages, Clara's legs jumped uneasily in the back crew jump seat. The whispering had continued despite her best efforts to keep her face expressionless. Even the crew was starting to change how they behaved. Nobody gave her a direct look. She was not consulted. The unrelenting heat of judgment pressing in from all sides had rendered her invisible. At last, she got up and went over to Rachel by the galley. She tried to sound calm as she muttered, "I need to talk to the captain." Rachel remained still. "Your presence on the flight deck is prohibited," Clara muttered. "This is serious. Before anything is blown out of proportion, I must clarify what transpired. It's already blown out." Rachel interrupted, whispering. Clara remained still. Rachel's voice went even lower. "Are you even familiar with the man?" Clara remained silent. "He isn't merely flying for fun. We're all being paid next month because of him. You prevented him and his family from boarding his own airline, even though his signature appears on every fleet increase." Clara opened her mouth to answer, but her mouth fell flat. She had nothing. Clara stood by herself by the drink cart as Rachel turned away. It finally set in at that time, that chilly, weighty moment. It has nothing to do with a seat. It had nothing to do with policy. Her career had recently terminated due to her judgment. Captain James Carter sat quietly in the cockpit, his gaze fixed on the horizon, his thoughts replaying every word of the executive conversation. He had never been told to keep the crew after landing in mid-air. That only took place in the event of a serious internal case or a legal infraction. Furthermore, this one was not going to be ignored. He looked at his screen below. There was another message. Create an incident report. Interviews will be conducted by Internal Affairs upon arrival, and all correspondence will be recorded. It dawned on him then that the true turbulence had not yet begun. Slowly, the hours went by. The planes sliced through clear sky, but each mile seemed heavier inside. It was abnormally quiet in first class. Even the travelers who usually requested additional pillows or ordered wine appeared hesitant, uncertain of how to act. They had all witnessed the events at the gate and experienced the change as the Moore family boarded. Stephen hadn't moved much since takeoff when they recognized this wasn't just any family. Like a man who knew exactly how things would turn out, he sat up, straight eyes, front, silent, and neither aloof nor conceited. Teresa put her hand lightly on Alana's shoulder and leaned her head against the window to watch the clouds fly by. Daniel had finally opened his book, but it appeared like he had spent the previous 20 minutes reading the same page. Rachel paused close to them as she made another silent round with warm towels. After pausing, she leaned slightly in Stephen's direction. "Please don't hesitate if you or your family need anything at all." Stephen faced her and made eye contact for the first time. Despite his placid demeanor, it was powerful. "You've shown kindness," he remarked. Plainly, "That's sufficient." With a gentle nod, Rachel walked down the aisle, her pulse racing. The man didn't speak louder. He didn't have to. She had previously worked with executives, some noisy, some challenging, but none like this. Michael Harris exuded a presence that was not demanding of deference. It forced people to examine themselves. Clara was no longer able to remain motionless back in the rear crew area. With her arms crossed and her entire body rigid with fear, she stood close to the galley. She had repeatedly rehearsed her movements in her mind, the way she had viewed that family, how she had thought they were at fault, how she decided the 4 tickets didn't belong before ever scanning them. Even still, her pride attempted to distort the fact. It was merely a miscommunication. It was protocol. The same call might have been made by anyone. But she knew deep down that wasn't the case. Policy had prevented her from asking. She had asked out of presumption. And now she was sitting in the rear of the aircraft that she had previously been in charge of. A junior attendant she taught a few months ago now occupies the seat that was formerly hers. Never had the curtain between first class from the rest of the cabin felt so meaningful. She wasn't simply taken away. She felt she belonged in this world. Yet it had taken her away. There was also a change in the conversation among the other crew members. During cruise time, they would typically swap snack packs, discuss about other passengers, and jest discreetly. However, they hardly spoke today, and it wasn't to her when they did. As they went by, she heard fragments. He didn't even speak louder. HR will be furious about this. She gave it her all throughout her career. She balled her fists beneath the galley counter. Being shouted at was worse than the leadership's silence. She never received the scheduled call from the supervisor. She sensed that the damage was already done because there was no backup or support. Clara's gaze strayed to the cabin's front. She sensed them, even if she couldn't see through the veil. The kids, Teresa and Steve, were serene, unaffected, above the commotion, above the criticism, and above her. In that instant, Sarah Coleman comprehended something horrible for the first time in her whole flying career. The folks who silently watched her collapse were the ones she used to despise. And they made it happen without uttering a single word. Like background music, the sound of the engines filled the cabin. It was louder than ever for Clara, though minutes seemed to drag for forever. She felt burdened by every look from her fellow crew members. She had attempted to maintain her composure and pretend that this was a minor misunderstanding that would be resolved, but it was unsuccessful. No one glanced at her anymore, not even the junior flight attendant she had reprimanded for folding napkins incorrectly, and the hush surrounding her continued to grow. Captain James Carter went over the most recent order in the cockpit. The jaw tightened. There was a new message from Operations Oversight on the comm screen. One of the major executive priorities is passenger more. Make sure you submit the entire incident report within an hour of landing. HR and the legal staff will greet the crew at the gate. Mitchell gave his temple a rub. He had flown celebrities, athletes, and senators. However, this one was unique. Michael Harris was not well known. Mitchell could sense that he owned the room the moment he walked in, even though he didn't need the attention. This was not a man seeking retribution. He didn't have to yell. There was no need for an argument. No one on this trip could stop the wheels from turning, and he had already started them. Daniel finally spoke now that he was back in first class. "Do you think she understands what she did?" he said, leaning nearer. His father. Stephen took a while to respond. He looked straight ahead, his gaze unfocused. Then he turned to his son a little. You don't hear understanding in words? He added quietly. Silently you witness it. Daniel gave a single nod before turning back to face the window. It was heard by Rachel, who had just passed row 2. Those words lingered in her chest, even though she didn't intend to listen. Stephen's speech was free of resentment. There was no rage, only a silent reality that shrank everything in its vicinity. In the galley where Tyler Evans, a young attendant in his 2nd month of flying, was standing replenishing cups, she proceeded down the aisle and paused.
"Is it accurate?" He muttered the question. "That's the stockholder, Michael Harris." Rachel nodded slightly. "Yes." He remained silent. It was verified by the system. Operations made a direct call to the flight deck. The eyes of Tyler Evans grew wide. "Whoa, I heard she didn't scan all the tickets before blocking them." Rachel attested to the fact that she did. Tyler Evans looked over his shoulder. "Isn't she finished?" Rachel took a while to respond.
Although she didn't want to enjoy someone else's downfall, she had witnessed Clara ruin the lives of subordinate employees for years by disparaging them, scolding them in front of passengers, and making fun of those who didn't fit her definition of first class. The way she got on this plane is not how she's getting off it, that much is certain, Rachel remarked. At last, Clara meanwhile sat by herself in her chair and tried to force herself to move more quickly. Her knuckles were white from the firm hold her hands had on her armrests. Earlier she attempted to message her union representative, but there was no signal. Every update from the cockpit and every slight change in the crew's tone made her heart race. Then Rachel was standing next to her, unmoving and inscrutable. Startled, Clara looked up. Rachel said, "They want you in the front." Clara blinked. Right now, Rachel gave a nod. "According to the captain, a business representative is attempting to get in touch. They'd like to talk to you personally." Gradually, Clara stood up, dismissing her uniform as though it still had significance. Her legs were heavy. She was experiencing dry mouth. The tiny aisle felt like a courthouse walk as she followed Rachel toward the front. Captain James Carter emerged from the cockpit as they arrived, carrying a headset with a coiled cable. He said, "They're waiting?" Not in a rude or gentle manner. Clara slipped on the headset. For a moment the line was silent. Then there was a voice, quiet, low and clearly assured. "This is Thomas Grant from Corporate Ethics, Miss Tyler Evanston." She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. "I take it you know the situation." Clara took a deep breath. "I didn't say I had any thoughts." Evenly the voice said, "Don't explain, just listen." Not yet. Clara also did. The man on the other end, who had never talked to her before, spoke clearly as she stood there with her headset tight to her ear. "You must comprehend something before this flight lands," he added. "This is a serious issue. This report is not typical. You took a choice that endangered the company's reputation, legal standing, and public perception." Clara's breath caught in her chest. The speaker went on, "You didn't just treat a passenger disrespectfully. You treated the owner disrespectfully." The final thread of control she had been holding on to suddenly broke. Clara stood motionless at the threshold of the cockpit, her hands trembling slightly, but not enough to allow them to drop from her sides, her spine rigid, her throat parched, and her headset still firmly against her ear. Thomas Grant from Corporate Ethics spoke, and she listened to him with a coolness that no yell could ever match. "It's not just a delay," he remarked. "It has to do with the message your conduct conveyed. Regretfully, this isn't your first red flag." 3 previous passenger reports, several staff concerns, historical documents, and at least 1 internal compliance notice that was disregarded are all present. Clara started to say something, but Raymond continued. "You didn't check the facts before making a judgment. Not all 4 boarding permits were examined by you. You didn't request permission from your supervisor. You didn't do it the right way." He hesitated. "Furthermore, you made judgments on them." With each statement, the headset weighed more on her ear. Clara wanted to protest, to stress that things weren't like that, to declare that she was merely trying to follow the rules. But before any of her justifications could take shape, they all fell apart. "You're going to stay on this flight," Raymond added. You will be led to the terminal's administrative office upon arriving. Speaking to the media, co-workers, or passengers is prohibited. There will be security. You get it. Clara briefly closed her eyes in an attempt to suppress the sickness that was rising in her chest. Yes, she muttered. What yes? Yes, I do comprehend. The call ended without a farewell. Her hands were now moist as she carefully took off the headset. Captain James Carter remained silent. Just nodding toward the front jump seat by the cockpit, he re-entered and closed the door, with a jumble of hypothetical scenarios and the realization that it was too late. Clara sat down as if she were sitting on glass. The Moore family was calm back in first class. Alana's hands were still loosely gripping the handle of the gold present bag when she fell asleep, her head resting on her mother's lap. Teresa softly spoke something that only mums could say while adjusting her daughter's jacket. With his fingers lying close to the armrest, Stephen gazed out the window, unable to read. At last, Daniel put his book down and leaned in his mother's direction. Is she going to lose her job? Quietly he asked. Teresa took a moment to respond. She glanced at her spouse after looking at her son. Stephen didn't look up as he talked. The once she believed she was more valuable than we were, she snapped. Daniel nodded, but it took some time for the words to sink in. Other first-class passengers muttered under raised palms a few rows behind. They didn't even raise their voice, according to one man who was obviously uncomfortable. Everything changed with a single phone call. That's what occurs when a powerful person is treated as though they don't belong, his friend retorted. Or when someone finally says enough. The first man mumbled. There was a peculiar tension in the way. Even the flight attendants moved now. Less noise, more accuracy. They took orders fast, but nobody stayed. Something had changed in the energy. An unseen force encircled the group, bringing forth a new consciousness in the cabin. It was felt by all. Tyler Evans, the junior flight attendant, whispered to Rachel in the galley at the back. Is she really going to be pulled? As soon as we touch down, Rachel gave a nod. The flight is being met by security prior to debriefing. The administrator wants her escorted. She won't return from this, will she? Rachel spoke softly. After upsetting the man who owns your airline, nobody returns. Now hunching slightly, Clara sat forward, trying to blend in. At one point she confidently roamed the cabin, straightening clothing, reprimanding staff for preparing meals, and spoke down to guests she felt were inappropriate. But now, in the worst sense of the word, she was invisible. No one showed her any respect. Instead, they simply expressed sympathy, contentment, or silent, astute judgment. The air no longer felt like it belonged to her, so she tried to breathe. Damage control. Thoughts raced through her head. Perhaps if she issued a public apology, perhaps if she provided a statement in writing, perhaps if she pleaded with HR. However, she already knew something. It wouldn't make a difference. Not to them, not to the travelers, not to Michael Harris, of course. He hadn't spoken louder, he hadn't caused any trouble, but he had altered her entire future with a single, quiet, secret phone conversation, not in retaliation, with repercussions, and that was much more lasting. Clara now understood, as the plane got closer to its destination. The captain's cool, collected voice could be heard over the intercom. We've started down, ladies and gentlemen. Please ensure that all tray tables are in their upright positions and buckle up. Get the cabin ready for landing, flight attendants. It was a standard announcement to the majority of passengers. For a few aboard, however, it meant something completely different. It was the start of the end for Clara. It was the silent countdown to closure for Stephen. The crew had been silently preparing for this moment ever since the gate call had turned the day upside down. The seatbelt sign glowed above her, and Clara peered at it as if its meaning had changed. Her outfit was too tight, and the seat underneath her seemed too hard all of a sudden. The strain on her shoulders had become nearly intolerable, fear and shame together, pride encased in guilt. She had never questioned her position in this group and had never been afraid of being corrected, much less kicked out. Now, however, she was unable to stop shaking. Not on the outside, but on the inside, where it was more important. She mentally relived every moment at the gate. The way she discarded the family's answer without question, the assumptions she made, and the tone she used. She hadn't even looked at the boys' or girls' tickets. They didn't look the part, so she made an assumption. Because they didn't fit the stereotype of first class that she had in her mind, she didn't even fit in the jump seat now. Rachel came softly and silently toward her with a sealed envelope in her hand. She responded in a dry voice. "This came down from the captain. When we land, they'll be there to greet you." Inside are instructions. Clara's fingers trembled. As she took the envelope, she didn't open it. She didn't have to. What it said, she already knew. "You know," Rachel said softly, "you were one of the best on this crew once." Startled, Clara looked up. Rachel remained expressionless. "You were the most knowledgeable person with the rule book, but somewhere along the line, you neglected something." "What is that?" Clara's tone faltered. "That people are protected by the rules, not judged by them." Before Clara could reply, she left. The Moore family stayed composed at the front of the aircraft. Stephen gazed out the window at the expanding metropolis skyline below. Teresa used a tissue to gently clean Alana's cheeks. Unaware of the storm, the young girl had slept for the most of the flight. Daniel was writing something in a notepad that he had pulled out. His expression was intense, yet it could have been thoughts or nothing. Teresa muttered as she leaned in Stephen's direction. "Do you believe she now gets it?" Stephen responded, keeping his eyes fixed on the window. "It has nothing to do with her comprehension. It's about what other people seen and recalled." Teresa nodded gently. "Perhaps this was more important than we realize." With weary but steady eyes, Stephen turned to face her. "It wasn't just about us, so it mattered. It was about all of us who have been marginalized, questioned, and disregarded. What is normally hidden was seen today through the small glass next to the service door." Tyler Evans, back in the galley, saw the runway start to take shape in the distance. He looked at Clara, then at the first-class curtain that was closed. "Do you believe he had a plan?" "What?" he asked. "Rachel, that he was aware of. The extent of this." Rachel took a moment to fold a tray cloth before responding. "The number, he probably wished it wouldn't get that bad. I believe he provided her an opportunity to correct it." Tyler Evans gave a slow nod. She refused to accept it. "No," Rachel answered. She intensified her efforts. With mechanical wear, the plane's wheels dropped into position as it dipped lower. The cabin gave a slight shock. The travelers straightened their posture, buckled up, and put their belongings back in their bags. The final motions before landing were typical, but the atmosphere was unusual. Reaching into the seat pocket, Stephen took his phone out. On the lock screen, one message illuminated. "A press briefing and legal team are planned. The release of the statement has been authorized." He didn't answer. He put the phone down and locked it. He had done his part. The rest of the world would then have to make decisions on what they saw. Clara held the envelope tightly as the jet got closer to the runway. Her heart was racing. She had a dry mouth. She had lost her future. Now she was aware of that. But the loss of her employment wasn't the only thing that scared her. All of the people on this plane had just watched her last flight, and they would all remember. There was a gentle thump as the wheels hit the floor. Clara, however, thought the jet had crashed into concrete. For a few moments, the cabin echoed with the customary smattering of courteous applause. Short-lived, hollow, and habitual. The passengers started to move, reaching for their bags, extending their rigid limbs and conversing softly. However, Clara's world was no longer normal. This landing was only the beginning of a journey for her. It marked the beginning of a reckoning. Her breathing was irregular and shallow as she sat motionless with the envelope clasped hard in her lap. The weight of her name badge was greater than before. She was also acutely conscious of the crew members' avoidance of her gaze. Even the youngest and typically most eager to please Tyler Evans kept his gaze fixed on the galley cabinet while feigning to rearrange cups that didn't need to be moved. Captain James Carter gave his last announcement from the front. "Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. 3:42 p.m. is local time until the seatbelt indicator is switched off. Please stay seated and use your seatbelts. We appreciate you flying with us today. On behalf of our whole crew, Clara was not involved in any of the fresh flurry of movement that was sparked by the seatbelt lights' ping as they shut off. She stayed motionless, her eyes glassy, each moment growing longer than the one before it. Rachel drew back the curtain at the front of the aircraft, dividing first class from the rest of the cabin. Stephen sat motionless with his family. Alana had just woken up and was massaging her eyes. With the gentle elegance of a mother, Teresa brushed her daughter's hair back and whispered something to her. After shutting his notepad, Daniel carefully placed it inside his backpack. Stephen maintained his composure. His body was at ease, but his mind was obviously concentrated. Rachel came over to them. "The ground crew has come," she replied softly. "Just outside the jet bridge they are waiting." Stephen nodded. "Thank you." Rachel paused, then leaned a little closer. "Just to let you know, there is media outside as well." Teresa turned to face her husband. "You informed them?" He gave a headshake. "I didn't have to. Everything is already being watched by them." No one hurried as passengers started to stand, gathering their bags and moving in a line toward the aisle. Nobody pushed. Rather, they shifted their heads toward the front, toward Clara and the Moore family, some cautiously, some more overtly. One man in a blazer leaned toward Stephen in a first class. His voice was low as he replied, "I saw everything back at the gate. It was powerful what you did." Stephen gave him a cool response. "I took no action. I simply couldn't let it go." Now Clara could see them, heads twisting, faces facing forward, whispering. She was aware that everyone was seeing the scene. In order to record a woman a few rows back, even held her phone at chest level with the lens slightly tilted. She made no effort to conceal it. She didn't have to. Then the door of the jet bridge opened. They were there. A woman in a sleek grey business suit stood on either side of two security guards in black uniforms with silver trim. Karen Walsh Corporate Affairs was written on her name tag. Her presence shouted finality, yet her face was unreadable. As Nora climbed inside the aircraft, Rachel moved to the side. Her heels made a gentle clicking sound on the floor. She briefly looked at Rachel before turning to face Captain James Carter, who had just emerged from the cockpit. "Tyler Evanston," Miss Nora spoke in a smooth, neutral tone. Clara got to her feet slowly, her hands shaking. The envelope was like a lifeline to her. "Kindly gather your personal belongings and accompany us. An escort will take you straight to the administrative office." Once Clara glanced about at the crew, the passengers and the area she had once occupied. Rachel gave her a well-packed suitcase that had already been taken out of the overhead bin. Clara accepted it silently. The stroll down the aisle followed. At one point she confidently marched. She had reprimanded snubbed and fake, gracefully smiled at previous passengers. She is now being watched by the faces as if she were a lesson, many with judgment, some with satisfaction, and some with sympathy. She briefly met Michael Harris's gaze as she arrived in first class. He was not smirking. He didn't scowl. He didn't have to. He regarded her like one might regard an old uniform, no longer usable, worn out and thrown away. And Teresa, still sitting, said softly, just before she turned away, calm, not nasty, not mocking, "I hope you learn more from this than you lose." Clara's throat grew constricted, her face flaming. She nodded without responding. Then she exited the plane through the open door, leaving behind the world she had created for herself, her role, and the aircraft. Cold-eyed, silent people in dark suits lined the corridor beyond. Not a cheer this time. Behind her there was just quiet, and the faint sound of her footfall. With a bang that reverberated more in Clara's mind than in the hallway, the jet bridge door closed behind her. It didn't feel like an airport the second her foot touched the terminal's carpeted floor. Every step was watched, noted, and recalled. In what seemed to be a stage, a quiet antiseptic hallway, the two security guards remained close enough to clearly state their intent without touching her, with the accuracy of someone accustomed to mopping up catastrophes. Nora led the way as she marched forward, her heels clicking in a regular beat. With her shoulders slumped and her eyes downcast, Clara trailed after her like a shadow, praying no one else saw her. Naturally, though they did, she was seen even in the short distance between the gate and the elevator. Whispering to themselves, two gate agents stood close to the terminal counter. One of them, whom Clara had once publicly reprimanded for using the incorrect intercom phrase, now gazed at her with silent, astonished awareness rather than malice. Nora entered the elevator as the doors opened. Clara went silently after. The hush deepened as soon as the doors closed. Clara looked at Nora, who never looked up, and was standing with her tablet in one hand. "Before things gets any worse, is it possible for me to talk to someone in HR?" she inquired. Nora avoided eye contact with her. "In roughly 10 minutes, you will be conversing with them informally." Clara continued in a strained voice. Nora answered flatly, "What just happened isn't informal at all. You will be handled in accordance with business protocol. Compliance and legal are already involved. We have removed your file. Access has been taken away from you." Clara's stomach rumbled. "You're not understanding. I wasn't motivated by hatred. I made a snap decision." With serene gaze, Nora cocked her head slightly. "And you lost everything as a result of that decision." The elevator rang. The doors led to a silent hallway, soft carpeting, frosted glass walls, and subdued illumination above. It had only been during training years ago that Clara had visited this section of the terminal. It had felt impressive and pristine back then. It felt definitive now, chilly. A receptionist nodded to Nora as they passed. There was no verbal communication. Clara trailed behind her into a little meeting room without a window, through a side door. A man in a navy blue suit sat inside. Nathan Brooks is a supervisor of human resources, young, kind, and excruciatingly effective. On the table in front of him was a sealed folder that was already stuffed full of papers. "Not rudely," Ethan said, "Miss Tyler. Evanston, have a seat, please." Clara sank onto the chair across from him. Nora stood motionless by the door. Ethan took out a stack of forms from the folder. "With immediate effect, you are being officially relieved of your duties. This paper details the conduct violations that led to your firing, including disregard for protocol, maltreatment of passengers, and harm to the airline's reputation." I was not warned, but Clara's mouth dropped wide. I had no idea who he was. Ethan's voice remained the same. "It isn't about his identity. It has to do with what you did." The response was only intensified by the passenger's status. The infractions, however, are the actual action. Your presumptions, your statements, and your refusal to confirm. The papers, with the prominent title at the top, caught Clara's attention. "Final notice of termination of employment." She made an effort to calm her breathing, slow her thinking, and construct a potentially life-saving sentence. "I have 12 years of experience with this airline. You've had several flags, behavior notes, and passenger complaints during that period, but nothing significant enough to have you removed." "As of yet," Ethan stated gently. Clara gripped the edge of the table and shook her head. "For one mistake, you're going to fire me." For the first time, Ethan looked her in the eyes. "You won't get fired for a single error. This error exposed something we can no longer overlook. Thus we're firing you." There was silence in the room. Clara was unable to think. She had numb hands. She wanted to say something, but now every word felt inadequate. Ethan slid the form in her direction and said, "Please sign here." She reached for the pen, her fingers shaking. A final glimmer of hope blinked behind her eyelids as she hesitated over the signature line. "Can I help in any way?" Ethan did not recoil. "You are able to sign." She put her signature on it. He crossed the table with another form. "Additionally, you will return your uniform badge and access card. To retrieve your possessions, you will be brought to the employee center. Contacting current employees without permission is prohibited." Slowly, Clara nodded. "What follows?" Ethan shut the folder. "You go." "What about the Moors?" Softly she inquired. "What becomes of them?" Ethan took a while to respond. When Nora finally spoke, he turned to face her. "They're not making accusations. They're not bringing legal action. They were not required to. Their actions were much more irreversible. Clara blinked. "What are you saying?" Nora lowered her voice and leaned forward a little. They were restrained. They didn't shout. They made no threats. They only made one phone call, and that call demonstrated to everyone from the top down the strength of calm dignity. Clara reclined in her chair, her silence slow and agonizing. She at last comprehended what Stephen had taught everyone on that plane during that quiet. Being loud is not a sign of strength. Power is not the same as position, and when truth is held in quiet, everything can alter. With her access card deactivated, her badge taken off, and a final copy of her termination letter folded like a death certificate in the crook of her arm, Clara left the conference room. Her knuckles were white in the fluorescent light as she gripped her travel bag with trembling hands. Now everything was real, not a suspension, not a warning, not a brief error. Not only had she been kicked off the flight, but she had also been kicked from the same industry that she had made her name for herself. Silently, Nora led her down another corridor that led to the crew center. The two security guards were still close by, still silent, still courteous, still there. Clara didn't fight back. Nothing remained to oppose. The humiliation increased with each corridor they went through. On the opposite side of the glass walls, the terminal buzzed. The air is filled with passengers hurrying toward aircraft, rolling their baggage, laughing and hearing boarding announcements. At the airport, just another day. However, it was the longest walk Clara had ever taken in order to instruct junior attendants or impose last-minute uniform inspections. They went through a back door into the crew center, which she had used 100 times when she arrived early. It felt like her space once. It felt like unfamiliar territory now. She was given a plastic bin with her name on it by a young man from operations. It contained her badge bag, her spare outfit, parts a coffee mug that read "Cabin Boss," and a half-used notepad with scrawled reminders. The sight of it was enough to make her chest hurt. Standing to the side, Nora looked at something on her iPad. Not too much, but enough to give Clara room. Clara faced her. "Will someone discuss the next stages with me? Termination, HR, follow-up?" Nora didn't raise her gaze. "A package will be mailed to you. A flag has been raised in your employee file. You are not permitted to work for any airline that is a part of our corporate network, per policy," Clara gasped in surprise. "Flagged?" Now Nora looked into her eyes, red level. "This implies that you are not qualified for re-employment in this field. Your behavioral history and this incident have led to permanent categorization." The blood drained from Clara's face. "However, that applies to workers who are no longer regarded as embodying the company's ideals," Nora concluded, and to shield travelers against future misbehavior, Clara settled herself on a bench in the room's corner. She remained silent for a while, simply gazed at the bin's contents as if they were someone else's. Flights for 12 years. Airborne for thousands of hours. All of them were eventually reduced to a single plastic box. She struggled to think of anything, any justification, anything she could remember. Her work had made her proud. New hires had been trained by her. She knew all the policies by heart. She had never been gentle, but she had been quick, strict, and keen. She had made snap judgments about people based on their speech mannerisms and attire. She had made corrections to passengers who didn't require them. She had made an assumption, and the wrong family had been the target of her presumption this time. Not only because of their identity, but also because of the things they were able to avoid doing. They didn't shout. They made no threats. They didn't even ask for an explanation. With just one phone call, Clara's entire world changed. In her pocket, her phone buzzed. Her heart skipped a beat, perhaps a managerial person. It might have gone too far for someone who was prepared to say so, but there was only one name displayed on the screen when she took it out. She hadn't spoken to her old co-worker Jessica Hayes in more than a year. Desperate for a familiar voice, Clara gave a hasty response. "Hi there!" A pause, followed by a tentative voice. I listened. I watched the video. Clara took a swallow. It is not what it appears to be. They're making it sound like I didn't mean it. One more pause. The voice of Jessica Hayes became a whisper. Ara, Clara, they remained silent. That's the issue. Before anyone could speak, you had already caused all the harm. Clara opened her mouth to say something, but the connection was dead. Still holding the phone to her ear, she gazed at it. There were no defenses left for the first time in a very long time, no policy to cite, there is no tone to correct, no crew to call. She was by herself. Nora turned to see. All set to go with a nod. Clara got up and grabbed the trash can. They left by a side hallway that went straight to the staff parking area. Silently, the security guards followed till they arrived at the exit doors. For the final time, Nora turned to Clara. Don't wear your uniform again and don't expect the media to keep quiet, she said, but you're not prohibited from flying as a passenger. Clara went outside into the glaring sun. As though the sky itself had changed, the breeze struck her hard. With only one painfully clear knowledge, she headed toward the parking lot, unsure of where to go or what to do next. That day, the Moore family did not just step onto an airplane. They entered her life and demonstrated to her what great power looks like when it remains silent. Sarah Coleman would now have to confront the one thing she had always thought she was above, since she had nothing else to hide behind. Responsibility for what seemed like hours. Clara sat in her car, with the keys still gripped in her fingers, while the engine still off. Long shadows were visible through her windshield as the sun started to move over the parking lot. She did not, however, move. She was unable to. The box containing her possessions in the back car and her suitcase next to her served as mute reminders of a world that had rejected her and a job she no longer had. She used to think that this place, the uniform, the seniority, and the reputation were all hers. She talked authoritatively to travelers, traversed terminals with assurance, and proudly enforced the rules. She felt that she was entitled to first class, that she had earned it all, and that she should be at the top of the hierarchy. But over the past few hours, the truth had quietly seeped in like water, seeping through crevices. The airline was not what she had safeguarded. It wasn't secure. It lacked professionalism. It was her pride. She could choose who belonged according to the tiny, silent voice in her thoughts. And she didn't change her mind when that voice was questioned. She got right in. She was sat in a car that seemed like a box, unable to think or drive, and all by herself. She flipped through her contacts on her phone, including co-workers she had trained, managers she had collaborated with, and colleagues she had formally allowed on flights. Earlier, several had texted incoherently, "I apologize, are you all right?" It was a difficult day, but as word got out, the hush deepened. She tapped the name of her longtime co-worker, Mark Sullivan, with whom she had flown on numerous long-haul trips. It went directly to voicemail after ringing once and twice. She attempted another Amy Larson, whom she had previously coached. Voicemail once more. Another is Chris Bennett, the flight attendant she supported years ago during an incident in the air. "We apologize, but this number is not available." It was a minor industry. News spread more quickly than the truth. Slowly putting the phone down, Clara's eyes filled with tears. Not from indignation or anger, but from the horrifying knowledge that this was more than a firing, it was an erasing. She attempted to access her email in the hopes of receiving a message, an official message or anything from HR. Instead, her screen was inundated with notifications, news stories, comments on social media, a fuzzy picture of her at the gate, another of her leaving the plane, with her head down, security on either side, and a flight attendant removed when she refused to let her family board. First class, crew members are rendered dumbfounded by the CEO's subdued power maneuver, they called once. A viral moment starts a dialogue about bias in the industry. She continued to skim through comments left by strangers and individuals she didn't know. She received what she was due, the serenity of that man relaxing in the most comfortable manner. Consider yourself in a position of authority until the true owner speaks up. She appeared confident until she wasn't. Every remark was another insult, another reality she had attempted to deny. One of the passengers who had seen everything said this, and she saw it when she opened the newspaper. He didn't shout. He made no commotion. "I'll give you a call," he said. Then everything came to a halt. She shut her eyes. It was at that point that everything changed. He had only picked up a phone, though. One call, one sentence. One man putting dignity before drama. No threats, no lawsuits, no tirades on social media. She recalled the way he had gazed at her, not with scorn or even fury, but with a serene disillusionment that cut more deeply than anger could. It was the way her father used to stare at her when she did something self-centered, the way others look at you when you lose something you can never get back, and the way a teacher looks at you when you breach their trust. With the weight of everything finally settling in, Clara placed her head against the steering wheel and breathed shallowly. Not only had she lost her job, in a world she believed she understood, she had lost her place. Teresa's voice, smooth and unshaken, was still audible to her. "I hope you learn more from this than you lose." It had not made sense to her at the time. She had been too humiliated and too enraged, but now, alone herself in the silence, she did. It was more than just her error. It has to do with what it showed. Sarah Coleman, for the first time in her life, realized that she was not the strong, calm flight attendant she had always envisioned, but rather someone who had been granted authority and had abused it, with the only people who really paid for it being those who didn't even raise their voices. Long after the sun had set and the majority of the terminal had cleared, Clara sat parked for what must have been hours. The sky grew dark with the floodlights from the airport, creating long shadows over the almost empty lot. The ignition key was still not turned by her. She hadn't even made contact with it. She continued to feel heavy in her chest. Guilt was no longer the only thing. Something deeper, something worse. It was the recognition that she had become into the type of worker she used to hate in others. One who acted haughtily, made snap decisions and refused to recognize people for who they were. She had always taken pride in upholding standards and keeping things professional. However, those words now sounded hollow to her. What she referred to as professionalism had become second nature. She created walls to keep people out based on what she claimed to be standards. She also didn't see any family that day. She took action because she perceived a disturbance and a danger to her authority. More news alerts flashed on her phone. A brief remark from the airline was now included in one article. Slowly she opened it and read each word as if it were a sentence being passed down. Behavior that goes against the principles of respect and inclusivity is not tolerated. This situation is being thoroughly investigated and in compliance with corporate policy. Prompt action has already been taken to resolve the issue. We apologize to the Moore family from the bottom of our hearts. She was not given a name. They were not obliged to. Everyone was aware already. She continued to scroll. One of the travelers had uploaded a video, a grainy but unambiguous capture of the altercation at the gate. It was a clear sound. Her harsh, contemptuous voice could be heard, asking the family to move aside and wait for a new reservation. You could see the faces of the children, the father's uneasiness, bewilderment, and composure, as he said softly, "If you're sure about this, I'll make the call." Although harsh, the remarks weren't unjustified. She shut down the app and looked straight ahead. Clara had felt for years that she was entitled to authority because of her experience, though the truth was now brutally evident that seniority allowed for assurance. Without humility, without respect, and without the capacity to take a moment to consider someone's value, none of that mattered. She recalled times she had dismissed without giving it any attention. Because they didn't appear to belong there, passengers requested to be moved to a different seat. Those who were dressed too casually in business class were questioned. Quiet families are treated like strangers. She had made them feel inferior, but she had never screamed or hit anyone. They felt less because of her, and now the field to which she had dedicated her life, where she had previously felt strong, respected, and in charge, had shut its doors entirely. Instinctively, Clara went for her badge once more, only to realize it was no longer fastened to her uniform. It was in her rear seat's container. She could no longer wear it. She looked at the adjacent seat. Her cabin boss mug with its bold and cruel lettering was sitting face up. After picking it up and staring at it for a while, she opened the car door, went outside into the chilly night, and ceremoniously threw it in the nearby trash can. More final than she had anticipated, the sound of the porcelain breaking at the bottom reverberated up from the metal walls. She gazed up at the night sky while leaning against her car. Above her, planes sliced through the atmosphere, merely blinking lights in the distance. Another crew was now distributing drinks, fixing seatbelts, and getting ready to land someplace up there. Another family may be traveling there. Perhaps another gate agent would follow her lead, or perhaps not. Perhaps the video had been viewed. The comments might have been read by someone. Perhaps someone had taken a moment before responding too hastily, before allowing prejudice to pass for protocol. Perhaps her failure would teach someone something, and that Clara thought was the only thing left that mattered. Not her career, not her reputation, not her record, but whether someone somewhere could look at what she had done and say, "I won't be like her." She sank back into the car, started the engine this time, and let it idle. The headlights cut across the rows of empty spaces glowing against the asphalt. Her hands rested on the steering wheel, but she didn't drive yet. There was no plan, no direction, only the road ahead and the long, painful truth that sometimes the greatest losses aren't taken from you. They're what you throw away yourself because you believed you were untouchable until someone showed you never were. The next morning, the world had already moved forward. News feeds refreshed with new headlines, airports buzzed with routine planes, departed passengers boarded, and flight crews went about their checklist without skipping a beat. But for Clara, time moved differently now, slower, heavier, more honest. She hadn't slept. Her phone was face down on the bedside table. Silence long ago. She had stopped reading the comments, stopped answering to communications that weren't genuinely about support, only sick interest masquerading as worry. Her employee access had already been removed from all portals by the airline. Her airline email was no longer active. Once proudly ironed and immaculate, the uniform hung clumsily on a doorknob in the hallway, like if it was someone else's. She lazily went around her apartment. Framed pictures of crew dinners, training, graduations, layovers, happy expressions and proud stances covered the walls. Each frame now appeared to be a collection of moments captured by someone she no longer recognized, rather than a celebration. She paused before a single photograph. She was in her 5th year when it was taken, standing tall next to a captain on the tarmac. She was in uniform. Behind them, the plane was gleaming. She appeared solid and self-assured. "I've made it," she recalled thinking at the time. However, what had she actually created? A 12-year career that terminated in 12 seconds, not due to a single traveler, not due to a single household, however due to a habit, a tendency to think that authority included the authority to determine who was deserving. She made a cup of coffee for herself. There was a long pause in her flat. She didn't turn on her television. The drapes were partially drawn. Life continued outside. On the inside, though, the flight's memory would not go away. She remembered the daughter's bewildered gaze as she asked, "Why can't we go in?" Or the silent elegance of the mother, how she never once raised her voice. Or the son who watched every word while motionless and respectful, beyond his years, and above all, Stephen the father. So serene, so motionless, so sure, he didn't require loudness. Anger wasn't necessary for him. He had just done it. He called one person, and he did more than simply alter her destiny in the process. He made it public. as she passed him at the jet bridge, escorted like a criminal. Clara recalled the last time he hadn't grinned, he hadn't gloated. His eyes were quiet and calm as he watched her, as if he wasn't upset with her, as if he had just been let down, and more than anything else that disappointment had been scathing. An error message appeared when she opened her laptop and typed in the airline's crew login portal out of habit. No access, no employee ID was found, her throat constricted. What had happened could not be reversed. No appeal, no second chance, a blank document opened for her. No strategy, no intention, only a whim. Her fingers hovered over the keys for a long time before she started typing. To the Moore family, she stopped, breathed, then kept going. You don't know me beyond a few terrible minutes, but I now realize I never saw you clearly. I didn't see the father trying to protect his family. I didn't see the mother holding her daughter's hand. I didn't see the boy who stood there with more composure than I did. I saw something else because I was conditioned to, by the industry, by repetition, but largely by myself. She stopped, then proceeded. I was wrong, and I deserve every consequence. But I wanted to say this because no one compelled me to, because often the deepest lessons come from the individuals we try hardest to ignore. You showed the world what real strength looks like. Quiet, unwavering strength. I hope your kids remember the incident as a reminder that dignity triumphs over dishonesty, rather than as a humiliating experience. She didn't send it, but she did hit save. She was unsure of where to mail it. She had to write it, even though she might not have deserved to. She shut off the laptop, took a seat back, and allowed herself to feel the burden of everything, just for the truth, not for sympathy or atonement. It wasn't a loud fall for Sarah Coleman. There was no drama. Slow, quiet, and incisive. It happened in real time and was revealed by a single moment that ultimately held her responsible rather than by controversy. And those who made all the difference didn't yell. There was no argument between them. They didn't even speak louder. They just waited where they were quite entitled to be. The world now knew the truth about a whole culture of covert bias concealed behind uniforms and policies, not just about one flight attendant. The plane didn't simply halt when one man made one call. It caused eyes to open, and that was when everything finally fell into place for Sarah Coleman. If this story touched you, please like it, leave a comment with your thoughts, and remember to subscribe to the channel so that we can continue to share more inspiring stories in the future. Clara and the Moore family's story shows us that while composure and dignity bring true strength, prejudice and disrespect can have disastrous results. Clara lost her job, reputation and position as a result of her incorrect presumption about the Moore family based solely on their appearance. The Moores, on the other hand, not only defended their rights but also revealed a bigger issue with composure and a straightforward call. Prejudice concealed in actions and regulations. Never make snap judgments about people based on their looks or personal prejudices. A just society is built on respect for all individuals regardless of their circumstances or background. Humility and the ability to admit mistakes are crucial to personal growth and avoiding repeating mistakes. In today's American society, the problem of racism and prejudice remains a major challenge. Similar incidents, whether in the airline industry, the workplace, or everyday life, regularly surface on social media, holding individuals and organizations accountable. This story is a reminder that every action, no matter how small, can have a big impact, especially when technology records and disseminates it quickly. In your personal life, listen and verify before jumping to conclusions. In the workplace, treat colleagues and customers fairly. As a community member, speak out against injustice calmly but firmly. By exercising respect and humility, we construct a more inclusive society that is faithful to current American principles.